Hi, and welcome to today's video. It's gonna be a bit weird since I don't quite know what to classify this as, but anyways. It's a bit of good content, a bit of looking at how Skyrim handles things behind the scenes, and a bit of something else. Despite this, I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, so let's begin, shall we? My subject for today is the wood elf known as Malborn. He plays a pretty important role in the main story quest Diplomatic Immunity, but I don't care about important stuff like that, I'm just here to rant about stupid, insignificant details. My problem with Malborn is that his face haunts my nightmares, and I mean that in the most literal sense. I just can't look at his face. Why? Well, because I've spent hundreds of hours looking into how characters are created in Skyrim, and Malborn uses the default male wood elf face. If you create a new wood elf and don't change anything about their appearance, then you get Malborn. And yes, I'm cursed to cringe whenever I see these default faces in-game because I've learned to spot them all by now. Here are a couple of notable examples so you can share in my pain. Briel, Eriker, Sond, Friedrika, Freyr, all default North. Hatrosil, a default Breton, Branche, a default Dunmer, Gilfrey and Valga Venetia, default Imperials. And of course they are far from the only ones, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I guess the easiest way to spot examples of default faces is the fact that they completely lack any details. But with Malborn it's a bit weirder. In the final game you encounter only one NPC called Malborn, but there are actually two NPCs with his name, and there was meant to be a chest with his name as well. There is an unused message known as MQ201 player container name that was simply meant to rename a container to Malborn, and there are two unused containers that were meant for this. MQ201 player container no reset old, and MQ201 player container no reset new. The old container is quite interesting as it's still placed underneath the map in multiple inns, but not at the Winking Skeever. In fact, not in any big city. There are 10 instances of this chest placed in inns in Mortal, Dragonbridge, Iverstead, Falkreath, Cairnsgrove, Rorikstead, Winterhold and Dawnstar, even at the old Rolden and Nightgate inns. This implies two things. It appears that it would have been random where you would meet Malborn, and it would only be in small-time taverns, away from the big cities. The new version of the container is also placed in-game, but this time there is only one instance of it in the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood, so maybe Malborn was meant to appear there at one point as well. Or maybe you were meant to give your stuff to Delphine? It's not that important, since the concept of Malborn as a chest was scrapped entirely anyways. No, in the final game, when Malborn asks for your equipment, you actually give it to another NPC with the same name. And this NPC is very interesting to me. It isn't because he's inexplicably placed in the cell where dead bodies go, although that has made many people go wide-eyed in the past. My interest lies in the hidden purpose of this NPC. Of course, he's used as a container to store your items during the quest, but think about it like this. What does an NPC have that a simple chest doesn't? If you just said a face in a joking manner, then you'd be completely right. The only reason for this Malborn to exist in NPC form instead of just being a simple chest is that he was likely a face holder. What is a face holder? Well, I'm no Bethesda employee, but I do have a grasp on how they work. When Bethesda create an NPC that is in their eyes very important, it would seem that someone starts adding their AI and dialogue and some other necessities. Meanwhile, another person creates a copy of said NPC, only to create their appearance, so that it can be later ported over to the first version. An example of this can also be seen in the Dragonborn DLC with Freya. There is an unused NPC called Do Not Delete Me needed for export to work, that doesn't appear to have any particular purpose. However, she is an exact visual clone of Freya, and it's likely that this NPC was a faceholder that they forgot to delete because of the name. The quote-unquote export that's mentioned likely refers to the exporting of facial data. So what am I trying to say here? Well, I think that our hidden Malborn has the finished face that the Malborn in the final game was supposed to have. Only someone forgot to export the facial data. And because I can't stand default face Malborn, I've made a small alteration where his face gets quote-unquote restored. I've also uploaded this to the Skyrim Nexus, so if you want this Malborn in your playthrough, you can download him there. And that's all for today. I wish you all a good one, and I'll see you in the next episode.